Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. And welcome, everybody, to another episode of Positive Talk. My name is Kevin McDonald, and I want you to, if you've listened to the show before, you know that we always come out with a positive ending to whatever we're talking about. At least we give it a good old college try. And but this story that we're going to tell today, with the help of the author, who is Aran Shetterly. I can't say it. I'm going to have John say it because he's our international he can make words sound good that I can't sometimes. So
I think that's my official title, I guess, is word sounder gooderer guy. No, it's Aran Shetterly, and I can't wait to talk to him. He's going to bring to us kind of a pretty dark time in American history, but basically we're going to talk about some of the lessons that I've learned and the positivity and resilience that came out of it. But we're gonna get kind of deep and dark here.
But I learned so much more because he was telling us pre-show that it was the second most how would you say it, John? The second
Censored.
most. Thank you. Censored.
Yep.
A show of or a story of 1979, and you're going to find out why in just a minute. But I wanted to just make sure everybody's aware that history is important. We can't sugarcoat it. We have to tell it the way it was, and it's important for us to know it. And if this was the second most censored story of the year, I'm willing to bet that most people that are listening to this show today have no earthly idea what we're talking about. So I would love.
But by telling these stories and bringing them to light, the whole goal of all of it is to learn from it.
Yes, and you know what they say: if you don't listen to history, you're doomed to repeat it. And for some reason, my voice and my diction is not working very well, but we'll fix that as we go. I haven't talked much today, so let's go ahead and bring Aran. Aran, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
It is great fun. Now, first of all, I got to tell everybody that Mary Jackson from Cover to Cover, who's also on the Brushwood Media Network, recommended you highly. And so I've done some research, and I totally agree with her. The work that you're doing and have done, and the message that you're getting out is really, really, really important. And it has to do with the 1979 Greensboro Massacre. Now, I've heard of Bobby Greensboro, and I've heard of some other things, but I've never heard of that. Could you kind of fill us in a little bit about basically the premise of the book, although it's not the reason for the book?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, this is as you said, it's a dark chapter in American history, but one that I felt would illuminate sort of some aspects and nooks and crannies of who we are. But also I wanted to find a trail out. But the basic moment in history that happened quickly and then had ripples for a long, long time and still does, was on November 3rd, 1979, a Saturday morning in Greensboro, North Carolina, where there were still some of the largest textile mills in the world. Levi's sourced its dungaree material from Greensboro, North Carolina for over 100 years. So if anyone in the world was wearing a pair of dungarees back in 1979, it came from Greensboro. And so these activists had gone into these textile mills there and were trying to organize workers and struggling to do so across the race line. They were finding it difficult to bring white and black workers together and felt that the Ku Klux Klan was probably interfering with their activities. So they decided to hold a labor march to educate workers about why it was important to come together, that if they were together, they could make better demands of management. They could ask for better health care, better wages, etc. And so they were also very provocative in this. They called their march "Death to the Klan," and they were poking
Talk
the bear.
about in your face.
Yeah, but it was 1979. It wasn't
Exactly.
1949, and there's a way in which I don't think they thought that this was as dangerous as it ended up being. So here they were setting up that Saturday morning, setting up the sound truck, putting up posters, singing some songs, getting everybody revved up. And all of a sudden, a caravan of 9 cars showed up full of Klansmen, American Nazis, some other white supremacists. They picked a fight, started shooting, and in 88 seconds, 5 people were dead, another 10 were injured, and the cars sped off. And one thing that they noticed is there had been no cops there. And what then happened was this went to the justice system, and no one was ever held criminally accountable for this shooting. And so when I heard about this story, I thought, boy, how is that possible? There's so many mysteries here. How does someone become a communist in the United States in the 1970s during the Cold War? How does this shooting happen and no one be held accountable? How do we heal from trauma like this? And so I went into this to learn, and to discover. I didn't know much about this, and it took me a long time to try to figure it out. And I think it's 7 years, and now I have a book out, and it's my best shot at trying to understand this history.
Aran, what brought the story to your attention in the first place? I mean, how did you hear about it?
Yeah, great question. So I was with my father and wife in Greensboro, North Carolina, and my father's a painter, and he had a show of his paintings at the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, which Greensboro is this really interesting, important place because this was in the old Woolworths building where the first sit-ins started in 1960 and led to the desegregation of public spaces in the South. So he had a show of paintings there, and the woman who organized that show said, there are 2 people you have to meet. So we went to this little cafe at the edge of downtown Greensboro, and in walked Reverend Nelson Johnson and his wife, Joyce Johnson. And we sat and we talked for 2 hours, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I couldn't believe this story that I just told you, which I'd never heard before. They told me. But as I was saying to you guys before, that was fascinating and sort of curious. But what really drew me in was their spirit, this big, compassionate, loving spirit. These were people who carried trauma from that event and others every day, but they weren't cynical. They were still out trying to make people's lives better, marginalized people, poor people, still trying to get out the vote, still trying to, make the justice system more just. And I thought, who are these people? They're amazing. I want to get closer to them. And so a couple of years later, when I had a chance to sort of start a new big project, I drove down to Greensboro and I sat with them and I said, would you trust me to try to tell your story? And they said yes. And honestly, I'm humbled by that because, yeah.
So were they part of the march back then, or what was their involvement?
Nelson Johnson had organized that march.
Ah, okay.
And he'd been injured at it. So he was stabbed by a Klansman, still doesn't have the use of 2 fingers on his left hand. So yeah, he was right there and watched his friends be gunned down.
Aran, I got to ask you, because it strikes me that you had a Klansmen that had been besmirched in their opinion, and then you had this march, and so you had 2 different types of people, I guess, and there are no police there. You would think that would be kind of a major red flag that, hey, you know what, guys, there could be violence here. Maybe we should show up and make sure there ain't none. and there were no police there.
This is one of the darkest things, to be honest with you, about this story, right? I mean, we know the Klan is violent, and they have been for, over 100 years. We know that, some of the radical organizers and activists can be provocative, which is different, I might add, from being violent. I mean, not that they're never violent, but these guys weren't violent. But so it turns out that the Greensboro Police Department had an informant in the Ku Klux Klan. And they had asked him what the Klan planned to do about this march. And he had gone down to a big Klan rally. And he hadn't just listened, he had talked to this group and addressed them and said, who's going to come to Greensboro and do their patriotic duty and stand up to the communists? All these hands shot in the air. And then someone asked, can we bring guns? And he said, I'm not your daddy. And so he went back to Greensboro and he told the Greensboro police that he thought the Klan was going to come and they might come with guns. So it wasn't just they might have known. They actually were absent. The lawyers for the Communist Workers' Party would say deliberately.
That is now today. I can't say that. I would like to believe that today that scenario would not play out, but I don't know that. So it's mind-boggling to me that actually happened. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that was only 1979. I mean, John Lennon was still alive by a year. I mean, it was 45 years ago, and we really need to pay attention to this stuff. But I love the story of Nelson and Joyce because they rose above it, didn't they, over it all?
Yeah, I mean, there were 3 trials. They went through this. It was grueling. The victims here were blamed, really, because of that provocative language that the Communist Workers' Party had used. A lot of people blamed them for what had happened to them. And so they lost their jobs. They were pariahs. And, Nelson and Joyce Johnson, Joyce was in the second class at Duke University in North Carolina to admit African Americans. Nelson was this incredibly gifted student at North Carolina A&T, the sort of flagship state school for African Americans in North Carolina. These were 2 very smart, talented people who could have left Greensboro and gone and been successful anywhere. They could have gone to New York, they could have gone to Chicago, Detroit, anywhere. And they decided to stay in Greensboro and see this through, despite the fact that their lives were very hard there. And, after all the trials, they realized that, this sort of communist philosophy, communist language was not what was going to create change in the United States. And Nelson went to seminary and became a pastor. And there he encountered, in his mind, this idea of a sort of revolutionary and radical love through Jesus, and really embraced that. It's not that his goals changed, but his way of approaching the goals on behalf of the poor changed. And so he made this incredibly, to me, heroic journey to change his ideas and keep moving forward and stay in Greensboro.
John?
I was just marveling at the fortitude and the resolution there in dealing with all this. But it's amazing the transformation that he made coming from a Communist Party mentality. But when you think about what they went through, I don't know if I would have had the fortitude to stay there. And I'm trying to understand, you said there were trials and all. And so how did did they have actual people identify that they could attempt to prosecute that just didn't go anywhere? Or, how did the trials go? That's the part I was trying to grasp as you were talking about that.
Sure. And I would agree with you. I would have left Greensboro so fast. I would have gone and started over somewhere else and
Anywhere else, yeah.
rewritten my curriculum vitae and
Change my name.
um, so the first trial was a state murder trial in North Carolina. Longest at the time state trial in North Carolina's history. Lasted almost a year. And the Klansmen and Nazis were acquitted of murder by an all-white jury. And what the defense attorneys did very cleverly was basically, this was the Cold War, wrap these guys in the flag and say they were patriots defending America from communists. And, you know, there were some other details that helped them a lot, but that narrative resonated with the jury at that point in time. Then in 1984, where there was a federal criminal civil rights trial, and same result, same basic defense tactics worked again. But then there was a third trial, and this one was really interesting because it was the first time that the plaintiffs, the victims of the shooting, got to choose their own lawyers. And these lawyers were really good. And they had a heroic judge. No federal judge in North Carolina would hear the case. So this judge came down from Virginia, a guy named Robert Marriage. And he had been responsible for desegregating Virginia's public schools in 1972. So Virginia's public schools were segregated that long.
Yeah,
and
they were pretty late.
And when he did that, he had to have U.S. Marshals protect him for 2 years. White supremacists burned down his guest cottages, killed his dog, and he had to send his kids overseas to live. So this was a guy who understood what he was coming into when he went down to, sit for this trial.
And what year was this now?
1985.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And what he did, and this was interesting because there was no law that said that that the defense attorneys couldn't strike people based for race, like at that point. 1986, it changed, but he was a year early. But he told the lawyers that he would not allow that in his courtroom. So he ended up with a jury with a black person on it for the first time. And he allowed these lawyers for the plaintiffs to really tell the story as they believed it had happened. And sitting there as defendants were police officers, FBI agents, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm agents, city officials from Greensboro. All these people were there, along with the Klansmen and Nazis and informants. And at the end of that trial, for the first time, I think, and perhaps the only time in American history, Klansmen, Nazis, and police officers were found jointly liable for death. And that was the sliver of justice that sort of came out of the justice system in this case.
That's pretty cool. By the way, John, who are we talking to again?
We're speaking with Aran Shetterly, who is
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I wanted to call him a historian, and I guess you really are. But he's the author of Morningside, which talks all about the 1979 Greensboro Massacre.
Now, when we come back, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, I'd love to talk to you about the reasons for being part of the Communist Party, because I don't think it is what we've been told it is. I could be wrong, but I want to ask you. We'll be right back. Are you looking for a powerful way to grow your brand while making a real difference? Well, Positive Talk is the perfect platform to align your message with inspiration, hope, and meaningful conversations. By sponsoring Positive Talk, your brand will reach an engaged audience that values positivity and connection. People who want to support companies that share their values. Take this opportunity to showcase your business in a space that uplifts, inspires, and creates lasting impact. Don't wait. Email me, Kevin@kmmedia.pro today to learn how you can partner with us and spread positivity while growing your brand. And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald, and co-hosted with John Verico. And our guest today is, I'm going to say it this time, I promise, Aran Shetterly.
Shetterly.
Damn it. I'll get it. I will get it when he says. But I did want to mention to you.
I've heard worse, Kevin. I promise. I've heard much worse.
Well, that's good. I'm capable of much worse. But I did.
I was going to say I have two on this show.
I did want to mention that communism is now, even today, I do a show on Saturdays on the network that's called Unscripted Politics, and the conservative member, he spits out the word communism like it's one of the 4 or one of the 7 words that you can't say on TV that George Carlin used to do. And I don't think that he understands in its purest form what people who were interested in promoting the communist idea understood it to be. I could be wrong, but I get the impression that communism in the USSR and China and stuff did not turn out to be what the original concept and idea was. Am I wrong in that, Aran, or is that kind of true?
No, when we look around, I mean, what communism has become when it actually governs a country doesn't look very good in most places, right? Soviet Union, China, Cuba. I mean, my first book was about Cuba, and I spent a lot of time there, and boy, that was eye-opening to me. So, yeah, but when you look around at Europe, for example, there are lots of communist parties in different countries there involved in the politics, engaged in electoral politics, and talking about how they think the country should be run. But the fact about this group was
let me just ask before we go into that. I mean, let's just kind of clarify for the listening audience, what is that communism ideal as compared to the way it has evolved and become politically?
Well, I think there are 2 aspects of what drew these folks to communism in the 70s that relate to what you're talking about. First of all, they took the American idea, all men are created equal, very seriously. And when they looked around and saw that all men were not created equal in this country, they thought,
we're not treated equal.
Right, not exactly. Right. That we weren't equal. The question became what to do about it. What are the keys to unlock greater equality, more equity, in the society? And so they had tried a bunch of different things. Nelson Johnson had been a follower of King, and then he'd been involved in Black Power, and then he'd been involved in African movements. And before he came to this idea that, capitalism and was really one of the big problems here. And so the sort of siren song was, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, that we would all pitch in and help each other and make things more equal. Now, there's another piece of communism that drew them to it, which was the sort of revolutionary process, right? The idea that there was a method to developing fundamental change in a place, and that it might require over time a revolution. And these guys believed in that in the 70s. Now, they knew that they weren't about to start a revolution in this country, but they had revolutionary ideas.
Well, and isn't it true that I sound like a prosecuting attorney again? But isn't it kind of true that in its purest form, communism is all for one and one for all? We're all going to work together. We're all going to take what we can produce together, distribute it equally, and then everybody will, according to his gifts, be happy with their lives, and everybody can be supported. The problem is you run into the human thing, which is you've got people that want power, and rather than the chancellor or the head of the country living in the same house as a garbage collector, they wanted more. So it became impossible for equal distribution and stuff like that. And that's how the USSR and China and all those, they ended up with the power base that they have now, rather than distributed equally for everybody. So they use the wrong term as far as being communist, I think, because that was incendiary at the time. But at the same time, their motives, I think, were more of the pure variety. Is that close? Is that what you heard?
Sure. No, I mean, what a lot of these sort of places that you're talking about have ended up is in an authoritarian government, basically. Correct. And almost, and a certain ruthlessness about that, right? Believing they're right, and that they can do anything, any means justify the ends that they say what the end should be. And so, yeah, no, these folks were much more, in a sense, small d Democrat communists. I mean, in a way that they really wanted true equality, but it's very different being a small group in an opposition party than trying to run a system like that.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
So you go ahead and continue with them as they healed, and post 1985, they continued to work. Now, you met them in 2015,
right?
So they had been working all this time to develop and to help people. Tell us about their mission and how they viewed that.
Yeah. So after 1985, Nelson went to seminary, and there's this really powerful moment when he's studying. He's at a seminary called Virginia Union in Richmond, Virginia, and he could drive home to Greensboro every weekend. And he was home in Greensboro one weekend, and a State Bureau of Investigations officer knocked on his door. And it was Easter weekend, and he opened the door, and the guy stepped out, and the guy said, the Klan's coming to march here again. And it was the first time the Klan would march. This is 1987. First time the Klan was going to march in Greensboro since this shooting. And he said, what is the Communist Workers' Party going to do about it? Well, there was no Communist Workers' Party anymore at that point. But Nelson just said, we aren't going to do anything. But then he started thinking about it and thinking about being in seminary. And he thought, I need to ask these guys not to do this. So Nelson Johnson got in his car by himself, drove 70 miles out into rural North Carolina to meet with the Klan leaders and find them, and then meet with them to ask them not to march. I mean, this was this act of incredible courage, because these are the guys who killed his friends. And they were going to think, and he knew this, that he was out to get revenge, that he was trying to probably trick them. And so they ended up having a long and very involved and very dramatic conversation that I talk about in the book. But this was both him testing his new philosophy of, instead of having to smash the Klan and death to the Klan, it was, let's talk to them as fellow human beings, that maybe we can close this divide. That was one thing. But it was also a journey of personal redemption, because he knew that they had made mistakes, that he had made mistakes, that death to the Klan was too provocative, that, he should have been more careful, and he felt horrible about that. But there's a difference between making a mistake and doing something criminally wrong. But of course, he carried this trauma, and so he made this journey. And his wife, you can imagine his wife Joyce at home waiting for him to go home. There were no cell phones then, and a long day, but he came home.
I just can't imagine the bravery to take that step the way he did.
Yeah,
and he had to be prepared when he went to that meeting, because of the Klan's 100-year history of lynching people like him, and nobody knew really where he was. That could have happened to him, and so he had to. I mean, that's the ultimate. If you're willing to lay down your life for what you believe, that's the ultimate, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I just can't quite fathom the courage it took. And there was this moment when he got scared. And this is a guy who doesn't really have, as far as I can tell, in all my hours and days and weeks and months of talking with him. He doesn't scare easily, but he did get scared.
Apparently not.
He did get scared on that trip and had to sit and collect himself. Yeah.
So
one of
I
the
have to ask.
interesting things, I'll tell you this, I grew up in rural America, and one of the interesting things that jumped out at me about the conversation he had with the Klan was he was a rural person and they were rural people. And one of the things that helped that conversation was the ability to understand that language and that relationship to the land. So that helped that conversation actually move along.
I think it's also go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to say it always helps to in any conversation, in any discourse at all, is to start off with a point of commonality.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's helpful too, and we're going to talk about that when we come back from this break, and that is that until you meet somebody who doesn't look like you, you have no idea who they really are. And so it's important for us all to work together and understand each other, regardless of what we look like, who we love, any of that, because that is paramount to us getting through some of the crap that we've been. There's that word again, crap. We're going to have to do a show on crap, I think. Anyway,
we don't do crappy shows.
No, we don't. We need to take a station break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Verico is with us, and we have a wonderful author guest, and his name, John, is
Aran Shetterly.
Very, very good. Aran
is the author of Morningside, about the 1979 Greensboro Massacre and the struggle for American city's soul.
And if you want to go to his website, you can do that by going to
AranShetterly.com.
See, that was easy. Okay. And in any event, but
he
Aran,
just points and I speak.
Yes. But Aran, I have to tell you, I grew up in Kirkland, Washington. It was on the east side of the lake, and we had three in a school of 2,000 kids. We had three African American kids. Three. That was it. Mm-hmm. And they were all athletes, which had something to do with why they came in from out of district, because they were athletes and stuff. But so I didn't know any black people growing up. Now I have since known a ton because I was in the restaurant business and all that stuff. And the misconceptions that we have about somebody that we've never met is mind-boggling to me. But that's what he was attempting to do, wasn't it? To let them see what somebody that grew up in the same circumstances just had a different color to his skin. Is that kind of what his idea was?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it was talk to a real person, not an idea, not an idea as me as a black person, me as a communist. I'm going to sit here with you and we're going to just talk and see where it goes. And they talked about all sorts of stuff in that conversation. Some of it hard, some of it funny. Some of it they agreed on and a lot they didn't. But what he wanted to show them is that they could sit and have that conversation, that they didn't have to agree necessarily, but they could sit and do this peacefully as opposed to violently. And, at the end of that conversation, I'm going to tell you one piece about it. I want to hold one piece back for the book, but he asked them, he said, listen, please don't come. And they said, listen, here's the thing. They said, we can't not come now because everyone will know we didn't come because a black person told us not to. Now, they couldn't go that far, but they did say, we promise you when we go there, we won't start anything. And they didn't. There was no violence when they went to Greensboro in March that time in 1987. So, you could argue that they honored their word with Nelson.
And as being men, and in their mind, who had a lot of integrity, they followed through and they didn't do that.
Right. I mean, they of course saw themselves as people of integrity and said, well, if we say that what we're going to do, that's what we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And they spent their lives working for the betterment of everybody. What is their philosophy now?
That's the to me.
We're talking about the Johnsons now, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's Nelson and George Johnson.
Just for clarification.
Not the Klan, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, when I was working on this, and we're going to talk about the good ideas in the Johnsons, but a friend of mine said, bad ideas travel too. And, the thing is these ideas that from Greensboro to Charlottesville in 2017 and these other incidences, they moved these bad ideas along too. And so we always have to be vigilant. And that's what the Johnsons have done. So when he graduated from seminary, he then came back to Greensboro and he started a small church that really focused on the poorest people in Greensboro, homeless people, and people in need, and developed a church around that. And also started to come something called the Beloved Community Center. So after, going to communism and through Black Power and communism, he came back to the Martin Luther King ideas of, how to achieve justice in this, in America, and compassion and with love, but with an insistence on, justice and fairness. And so this Beloved Community Center sits there, on the edge of downtown Greensboro, like an alternate city hall. It's this wonderful place to walk into where you feel like any idea is accepted. No one's going to be excluded, that you can dream in some ways of a more just, more equal future and have real conversations with pretty brilliant people about it. And so it's a very special place that people make pilgrimages to from all over the country to learn from them and learn from their experiences. But as he was doing that, and this is really important, as we think about the positive things that come out of this, is they began to think about, well, wow, look at what South Africa's doing in post-apartheid, this truth and reconciliation process. I wonder if that could play here. I wonder if a truth and reconciliation process could come to Greensboro and help us heal some of the divides in the city over what had happened at that event. And so Greensboro became the first place in the United States to host a truth and reconciliation process on the South African model, and ran from 2004 to 2006 and produced a document that tried to explain what had happened on November 3rd, 1979. And they got Klansmen to participate, police officers to participate, lawyers, and of course, these activists to come and testify publicly about what had happened. And so this was this huge, important step to beginning to heal the trauma that city experienced around this event. And
is that document available to us today?
You can download it online, man. You can I can send you the link. I think it's greensborotrc.org. I'm pretty sure. I can check it if you want. But yeah, it's a powerful document.
Well, yep. and the reason that I bring that up is that there has been this thing going around the country lately about censoring history and not telling everything exactly like it was. I wonder, this is just me wondering, how many history books have got the accurate portrayal of what actually happened that day that are floating around schools in the South? I don't know.
Probably zero.
Oh, can we have at least one? I just want one.
At least if you're not talking about colleges. Maybe in colleges there are a couple, but not anywhere below college level, I doubt. Yeah.
Well, you did say this was the second most censored story of the year back in 1979 when this incident happened. Makes me wonder what the heck else happened. What was the most censored story of the year? They kept this one hidden. By the way, that is greensborotrc.org is the website for that.
And so you
can
can
read
Truth
all
and
sorts of
Reconciliation
interesting
Commission.
things there. Yeah.
So it's kind of like the January 6th committee. I'm
so glad you brought that up because, a couple points. One of the things that made this shooting unique on November 3rd, 1979, was there were 4 news crews there, and this was filmed. I sat and watched all the footage, okay, which is hard to do because it's horrible, but it was all filmed. It's like these things that happen today with people with their cell phones. So in a way, it's this look forward, right? Because there was all this video evidence, and so that played out in very interesting ways. But January 6th, right? Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, right? I mean, you can look at this happen in front of you.
Well, and I don't know if you know this, but the FBI came out with a report yesterday that said, nope, there were no FBI agents there, and there was nobody inciting from the government, from the FBI, inciting the insurrection that happened on January 6th. And that is something that one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you here is that we have taken history in many cases, and I know they say that history is written by the victor, but when we have so much disinformation about so many things out there that didn't happen or didn't happen the way they say they happened or whatever, this being one of them, it's important for us to recognize our history, don't you think?
I think to me, one of the really positive and hopeful things that came out of this was the tenacity of the Johnsons and other people involved in this history and their unwillingness to let go of what the truth was or the possibility of seeking the truth on this, right? So that it didn't get just washed away. And, so the Truth Commission produces this report in 2006. The Greensboro City Council at that point votes 6-3 not to even read it. It's like, they don't want to know. So, but then 11 years later, the Unite the Right rally happens in Charlottesville in 2017. You remember that when Trump? Yeah. Okay. So 2 days later,
good people on both sides.
There you go. That's the line that came out of that. 2 days later, the Greensboro City Council spontaneously apologized for November 3rd, 1979. In a way, all of a sudden they didn't feel alone anymore, right? They felt like they weren't the only ones who'd had something horrible like this happen. But they didn't say what they'd apologize for. 3 years later, in 2020, the depths of COVID, they hold a special meeting over Zoom, which I clicked into, and they gave a full apology for what happened on November 3rd, 1979, and admitted that the police could have prevented the violence. And, this is the thing, is that if that Truth Commission hadn't happened, if the Johnsons hadn't been relentless and other people hadn't held on to it, that never would have happened. And at some point, people became able and willing to listen. And then, real healing can really begin in Greensboro because they can begin to share a story.
Well, and I think it's finally time, and they're starting to do it now. Like there also is the destruction of Tulsa, which was a big deal that I'd never heard of, or the Tuskegee Airmen, and what happened to them. I don't think that's in the history books either. But those are the things that we have to recognize so that we can get past it, so that we can understand that we are all one and that we can work together and that we don't have to be adversarial to one another anymore, and meet people that are different than us, and have conversations, and like this conversation. And I want to thank you for taking the time, 7 years, I understand, to write this book, because it's an important work.
Thank you. It took 7 years. It took me a long time to understand it. This was the third biggest FBI investigation in our nation's history at the time. So there's huge amounts of documents, 3 trials. I interviewed over 70 people and spent hours and hours with them. So it took me a long time to get my head around it and to trust that what I was saying was as close to the truth as I felt I could get. I wanted to make sure, because I needed to get this right. You can't mess around with history like this. That's how I felt. Of course, I also procrastinated along the way a little bit. I had a son. There was COVID. So it took a little longer than it needed to.
It's called, Aaron, it's called life.
Life happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I had to embrace it. Yeah.
As well you should, because that's what it's all about. John, go ahead.
I was just going to say a point that Kevin brought up, and that we've been actually, kind of talking about, is something my father taught me early on. And he always said, don't say you don't like that person until you've given them a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Don't look at the surface. Don't make assumptions. Get the opportunity to know them, and start from that point of commonality. What do we have in common with that person first? And then once we get to know them, we've given them a chance, then, we can decide whether or not we like them.
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, and I'd love your opinion on this, I think that we have 2 choices that we can do going forward. We can progress from a place of love, forgiveness, kindness, or we can go forward with a place of hate, division, and fear. I think hate, division, and fear will not serve us well over time. Love and kindness will. What do you think?
That's what I learned from the Johnsons. I mean, I'm a different person 7 years later, having made this journey, and I feel like a stronger person. And now I feel like I'm one of the guardians of this history, that I am tapped to come out and talk to you and other people about it and why it matters, and to try to hold the light as they have, and exactly, they would agree with you completely. One of the things that I tried to do in the book was to present every person I wrote about, whether they were a Klansman, a neo-Nazi, a corrupt cop, whatever, as full human beings who weren't only one thing, who weren't cardboard cutouts, who had, the potential to be more than that. And that I took from the Johnsons. They refuse to quit on any person. They believe every human being has dignity and deserves a fair shake. And, so I tried to represent that spirit as I could in the book, and I agree with you completely.
Kevin, do we have to take a final station break?
We did. You were just thinking what I was gonna think.
You're listening to Positive Talk Radio with Kevin McDonald, and I'm John Verico, and our special guest today is Aran Shetterly, author of Morningside, and tells all about the story of one of the most censored dark periods of American history, and that is the Greensboro Massacre. And we'll be back right after this.
Boy, you're good at that.
Okay, so Sarah, I'm dropping you off at Emily's?
Yep.
And Josh, you're going to?
Soccer, Dad. Soccer practice.
Right. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to let you know when I pick you both up, I'll be wearing my short shorts.
What?
No!
Yep, and my dorky dad hat, and I'm gonna do my dad dance for all your friends. They'll love it!
Seriously? Why?
Because I like my short shorts. Of course, I could be talked out of it if you guys would just buckle up your seatbelts without giving me a hard time.
It's important to get your kids to buckle up for safety, no matter what it takes. And sometimes, all it takes is your parental powers of persuasion.
Okay, we're buckling up.
See, all buckled.
Good choice. I'll just have to do my dad dance at dinner time.
What?
No!
Do what you have to make sure your kids are wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. John Verico is with us, and we have a special guest. His name is
Aran Shetterly.
And by the way, I have to thank Brushwood Media for that last announcement, because it is so important to use your safety belts if you are driving anywhere, because things happen awfully fast, and you want your kids to be. And I know Aaron's got a young son, and we want him to be well and stuff like that. So
yeah, Aran, would you actually make threats like that to your children about wearing dad shorts?
John, I know you would,
which is why I don't have any children.
Well, so far I haven't had to. He expects it to go on every time.
That brings up an interesting thing. When I was young, when I was growing up, there were safety belts in the front seat. There weren't any even in the back seat of the cars.
Yeah.
They were only across your waist too. They didn't have
and they were only across your waist. Now kids expect it. That's just the way it is. So they get in the car and they put on their safety belt. Everybody does it. It is a matter of, it's like muscle memory. So if you get used to talking to other people who don't look like you, it becomes like putting on your safety belt. How do you like this for an analogy? It becomes more of a thing that you just do, that you don't think about. Can I put on my safety belt? No, I don't. Can I talk to this person or can I not? You can smile at them and see how it goes. And that's all it takes. Just be kind. And that's at least my opinion. What do you think, Alan or Aaron? Whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that seem scary until you do it, right? I mean, and you can load up the idea that someone who looks different from you is, not going to understand you or going to be mad at you or all these different things. And then all of a sudden you start having conversations with people and they talk back to you in a civil way and you can find points of commonality. It changes everything.
It's funny when we sequester ourselves into a small community of like-minded and like-looking individuals, and we don't experience anything outside, we are fearful, right? We tend to have that. But that's what I love about, when I was in the Navy, I had an opportunity to travel, and we love traveling. We love meeting people from other countries and other cultures and other dynamics, because we learn so much from each other, and we found out something. Oh my goodness, we can actually get along with each other despite the borders, despite politics, despite all that other garbage that goes on in the world, all the controlling factors. We actually can get along with other people, learn from each other, share with each other, and love each other. And it's just a matter of approaching it with that mindset.
And you might not even be able to communicate with each other, but that doesn't matter.
That's the fun part.
What's interesting about that, Kevin? I have these memories of traveling in countries like in Eastern Europe when I was younger, where I didn't share the language. All I had was one of those phrase books, right? You could sort of murder the language or point. But in my memory, I've had these full conversations. Like we understood each other, Yes. I don't know how it happened, but we ended up having these wonderful experiences with making friends in these different places. And language was only a small part of it.
And sometimes, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes if like you're looking for directions and you're in another country and you don't speak the language, you'll have people that'll actually go out of their way to help you get to where you're trying to
walk you down the street, take you down to those places. Yeah, absolutely. That's how I found my way back to the Navy ship multiple times in various countries
at various times of the great late night when he wasn't in the greatest shape,
not having any idea where I was, not speaking the language, not even knowing how to get to taxi to get to where I was trying to get to, and ultimately finding people who were able to help me get back to the ship and on time.
Yeah. And John, I mean, the American military itself, one of the most integrated institutions in our country, right? That where you're going to experience people from all different backgrounds.
Yeah. Especially on board a Navy ship where you're sharing, like I had to share my room with 180 other guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was usually, so Nelson Johnson grew up in, the segregated South. And then in 1961, ran off from his family farm against his father's wishes and joined the Air Force, and was in the Air Force for 4 years. That was a hugely important experience for him because he'd never experienced white people before. I mean, we think it's only goes one way, this sense of difference and fear.
Completely different. Yeah.
Redirection, anyone who hasn't experienced someone who's different is a little anxious at the very least about it to begin with.
Yeah. And that happens everywhere. I remember I actually went to speak at a local school in Southeast Washington, D.C. And I walked into the school and these kids were staring at me, and I heard one whisper to the other, said, "That's a white man."
Mm-hmm.
I was like, we're in Washington, D.C. for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just absolutely amazing. But I tell you, once, like I said, once we open up our hearts and our minds to understanding others and knowing that we're all on the same planet together, there's so much more we can coming from a foundation of love and kindness. So,
Aran, what was the name of the building that he created on the outskirts of town?
Yeah, it's still there. It's called the Beloved Community Center.
I want one of those in every city and town across this country.
I totally agree with you.
Let's do it.
And the phrase that a couple of the phrases that Nelson Johnson uses is, one is, let's walk toward each other. I thought it's very simple and very powerful, right?
That goes on a t-shirt.
And another one is the fierce urgency of now. It's like, let's get this done now. And, he's very good at that.
We have suffered and have seen suffering enough in this country that we really need to make some really systematic changes to make it better for everybody. At least that's my opinion, because, I've got a 5-year-old granddaughter. I don't want her growing up. I want her to know these things as being a distant memory, that everybody's the same. And it's time, don't you think? I mean, we've been at this for a long time.
Yeah. I have a 4-year-old, and I would much rather he grew up in a place where kindness is the way we approach things than meanness, obviously. And so it's in that spirit that, I try to end up with in this book, right? Is that this light of kindness that, and truth, not letting go of, what's really true in order to get there, because then it falls apart, but trying to get to, kindness and love and justice together, and let people meet there and do that together in community. That's a wonderful place to strive for.
And I love Reverend Johnson's quote there that you said, let's walk toward each other.
Yeah.
I love it. And I think it's a great place for us to wrap this up, because unfortunately we're out of time, Aran. But I really appreciate the fact that, first of all, you spent the time to bring this story to light, and that you came on to our show to help to illuminate this for our listening audience.
Thank you so much, guys. This time went fast. I can't believe it's already up.
It goes by so fast.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and dig in on this.
You have been most instrumental in helping a lot of people understand that this fundamental change needs to happen. And it started with a Black couple out of Greenfield or
Greensboro.
Bobby Greensboro. I don't know what it is. I think I need some medication. So anyway, thank you, everybody. And hang on and we'll be right back. Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another, because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin@kmmedia.pro.